Hey guys, welcome to this tutorial. In this video, we're going to be learning how to map a client with sparse, uneven brows on Procreate who also has fair skin and a cooler tone. This is a client who wanted more of a subtle enhancement. So for example, she wanted to do a lamination, wax, and stain, and she only wanted to go 0.5 to 1 shade darker with minimal thickness added. This means that we need to be very precise with our proportions, balance, and overall harmony. So by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to approach a similar client, how to determine the ideal arch, tail, and overall structure without overcorrecting. Most artists struggle with mapping because they go in blindly, hoping for the best, instead of really knowing exactly where they're taking the shape. That's why today I'm really going to be breaking down the step-by-step how to map for this specific client. And really, mapping isn't a one-size-fits-all, and I feel like this isn't broken down enough when we, go to watch content on Instagram. It really is going to be different for every person, and I do teach this inside of my courses, but everything from their muscle pull, to their hair flow, to the type of shape they're coming in with, to their overall goal is going to affect the things that you do, the way that you place your lines, the location of the lines, and things like that, right? So all of these are going to affect her final result. And I'm going to also be sharing the biggest mistakes that artists make when mapping and how to avoid them so that your clients walk away obsessed with their brows. So the biggest reason that artists struggle with sparse or uneven brows is, they try to force a perfect symmetrical mapping without really considering, the client's natural flow. So it really isn't about creating artificial symmetry, right? It's about really just strategic placement because, on the Procreate, you're going to see me create these perfect lines, but we all know that when we're working on an actual model, their muscle pull, the way that they express, it's not that perfect in real life, right? So take what I teach you guys here with a grain of salt because obviously I'm working on a very flat surface here. So it's going to be different when we're applying those lines on the client's ridges on their brow bones and things like that, right? So this is really just going to teach you guys where to strategically place the lines. But when it comes to actually using the mapping string and filling out people's facial structure, the best way to always learn how to shape is going to be on a physical client. That's just the best way, hands down. But really, we're going to be teaching you guys how to train your eye to see the little details. That way you know how to approach your clients when it comes to specific challenges. This is what this series is really about. So first we're going to, and keep in mind that I do teach my consultation process, which has gotten me booked and busy inside the course, but we're going to just break down the basics in this tutorial today. So we're going to start with assessing her brows that she's coming in with, right? So I have a whole process that goes into this in more detail, but first we're just going to assess her brows because really the most important thing is keep in mind what our client's overall goal is. And I think that another mistake that artists make is that they go, into the appointment and they don't ask enough questions. So they'll be like, okay, what are you looking for? And then that's it, right? You'll go the whole entire process without really letting your client be a part of the process, checking the shape. When they say they want to go dark, right? That could mean a lot of different things. How specific are you getting with your clients in each session? Are you testing out the pigments? Are you showing them how thick? Are you just kind of guessing based off of one question they answered? Because that is what leads to making a lot of mistakes and, creating an unhappy client. And this is something that I've learned in the last 10 years. So we're really going to just start with breaking this down, but first, we're going to look at some of her imbalances, right? So if we know that we're going to create a lamination, wax, and stain, what is our overall goal? And really, she just wants to create more fullness. And first, we're going to look at her brows. I created a middle line right in here to just kind of be our divider. And we're going to just break down her fronts, her tails, her arches and her tails, right? So keep in mind that we're just going back to brow basics here. These are the fronts, arches, tails, right? And then this is going to be the entire body of the brow, the width of the brow. And then this right here is going to be the front of the brow. This is going to be the top of the brow, okay? So we're just going to break that down because when you guys hear me talk about it, you'll know what the specifics are. But really here, this was her favorite brow, okay? And we can clearly see, oh, let me take that off. One second. So this was her favorite brow. And that is because, we have the most hair here. It's the most even, the most seamless. Typically, a client will have a favorite brow. And usually that is the easiest to model unless a client is, has muscle pull that is like way higher. This brow's up here and this brow's up here. Like it can get a little bit challenging in that case. But really, we want to kind of identify what their favorite brow is and why. And the reason why her favorite brow was this brow is because, again, she has like the most hair. It's the most even. It's the most dense. And you can see the hair flow is pretty consistent. So she wanted to match this brow to this brow overall. And then basically here, looking at this again, you can see that this brow is missing hairs up top. The tail is a lot shorter. Her front is shorter. So, these are things to keep in mind because as we are placing our stain, as we are placing our lines to map, these areas are what we need to focus on to create the illusion of evenness, right? So basically we'll be filling these areas in to ensure that it matches this side, right? And overall, we need to know like what her goal shape is. And because, again, we go over this inside the online course where I teach you guys the different facial structures, the matching brows that like pair well with them, what's the most complementary. But for the sake of, not going so far, making this video like 2 hours long, she does have quite a long face. So I would say that she's a mix between oval and diamond because her cheekbones kind of protrude outward. So because her face is longer, we don't want her brows to be so archy, right? Because if that happens, what is that gonna do, right? It's going to make her face look even longer. So we want to kind of just go with what she has naturally, which is more of like a softer, slightly flatter like shape. But then again, we want to make sure that we're not going too flat because the eye here will end up looking like it will pretty much close off her entire eye if we do something that's too straight, right? We don't want to do that. So we want to keep some of the arch because she does like that softer arch. So I would say that we're definitely aiming for more of a softer arch with a mix of a like flatter brow, right? And keep in mind here, you can actually see that on this brow, she has more arch. This one is flatter because of the way that her hair slopes. So the hair begins to slope further out on the tail here, and then the brow begins to slope in the middle on this side, right? So we're going to be balancing all of that out. So now we know we're going to do more of a soft arch, slightly flatter, so that way it's not too high in terms of the final result because we don't want to over elongate the rest of her face. So something along these lines, right? Like we want to just kind of keep what she's got going on the side and then keeping like a nice arch there, something like that. But, we'll be drawing that out as we go. Okay, so first things first, we're going to create our middle line here. So we're going to turn this on. I use symmetry. And then we really want to make sure that the middle line is exactly where we want it to be, because that is our anchor point, right? So if that's even a little bit off, that can throw off the entire shape. So now that we have that placed, we're going to locate the front of her brows. So keep in mind that when we did her consultation, she didn't want to jump too far to the front because she didn't want to feel like she had a unibrow. So if a client's brows grow much further than, where the starting point is, which typically like we're taught generally that their front points kind of need to be lined up with the the dip in their nostril. But again, it's not black or white, right? It really just depends on the client. So I would say if you have a client, like in this case, where her hairs are growing out like further from her tear duct or the nostril, because you could see here that like it's a few millimeters off. You can start by taking them in a few millimeters at a time. And typically with this client, I would ask her, hey, you know, like, how do you feel about placing your fronts here or placing your fronts here? And then once I get that approval, then I'll make my final decision. So we ended up taking her brows really only in like a few millimeters to start, because the jump, she didn't want that jump to be like too big, right? So we took it in actually even closer than that. I would say we started about like right here. So like not exactly on the dip of the nostril. So we started about right there. And the reason is because we didn't want too much of a skin gap on, especially on this left side here. We didn't want too much of a skin gap. So imagine trying to have to like fill in the left eyebrow on this side, right? Filling in this left eyebrow, like, especially since the client didn't want to go too dark, like that would be almost nearly impossible, right? So we need to keep that in mind, that we don't want that skin stain to be too dark. And keep in mind that I do teach like different types of application processes, and in this case we're going to do a combo. So we'll be doing strokes on this side on the fronts, and then we're going to be doing traditional stain method on the rest of the brow to make the rest of that a little bit darker. But you'll see in the final result that she's going to have a much softer finish. Okay, so we're going to turn that drawing guide back on, and now we've located the fronts, and now we're going to work on locating the arches. And this is like the number one thing that so many new artists ask me is, how do I know where to place her arch? Again, this is going to be different for each client, but in the case that we know that we are going to be creating like a softer arch, we know that like the closer, or if you don't know, I do again teach this inside of BAB, but the closer we put that arch to the middle, right, the more triangular and sharp that arch is going to be. Now keep in mind that the further out, right, we take that tail, the more straight that brow is going to be. So if we know the characteristics of a softer arch, we kind of want to find that in between, right? Because we want it to slope nicely, but we don't want it to be too straight because it will flatten her face too much, and we don't want it to be too much in the middle. So usually, like if we were using a mapping ruler, I would probably choose something along this line here. And we can always double check it when we go to like map our shape out. But I would start here, but you could see here on this brow, it's a little bit too far inward. So let's take that out just a little bit more. This is why sometimes having that symmetry on can kind of cause it to be uneven, because obviously we're using technology here. But this is the first line, and then I would do a second line. This second line is going to determine when that arch of the brow slopes down, right? So we're going to go about right here. And then let's just double check, right? So how does that slope? How does that slope? Is that what we're kind of looking for, right? I would say I would bring it in even more. So we did bring it, I brought it too far out. So let's try it right here, like where I had it originally. So these are the things that you're considering when you are going to place lines. Like none of it is random. And I know a lot of educators don't teach on that. So for here, example, something along those lines, right? We don't want probably too rounded, but I'm gonna place the second line like right in here. Yes, so that's kind of what we're looking for, right? You got a nice slope. Okay, so now that we've identified where her arch point is going to be, now we're gonna work on the tail. Keep in mind that we don't want the tail to be too long, and here's the front, right? We don't want this tail to be too far down, otherwise we're going to create too much of a droopy tail, right? So we want to kind of like pull that tail outwards a little bit without removing too much of the hair down here, right? So we want to take our string, use the bow of the lip, and then we want to preserve as much hair as possible. And then keep in mind, let's look at both of the brows, right? So again, we're using technology, so it's not going to be completely even, but we're going to do our best here. And then we're going to kind of keep it right there. Okay, so we're preserving as much hair as possible. She has a natural curve, which we kind of want to like fix and make a little bit more angular, because not too angular, but a little bit more, so that way it doesn't curve down too much. Otherwise it's going to make the tail look too droopy. So the more this goes past the front, the more droopy the bow becomes. The more you cut off this area, like right in here, and it doesn't create a lift. In fact, it kind of like makes her eyes sag a little bit, right? So we're going to keep that there for now. And then we're going to create the fronts of her brows, right? So this is going to create the front of the bottom of the brow. And we want to go with where her last bit of hair is. I don't like to go too much further than that, because like, unless like the hair is like completely uneven, but in this case, like I'm going to just use that as my baseline. So like right about there. And then the next line that we're going to create horizontally is going to be what determines the thickness of the brow. So I would always say, like, here's like the last bit of hair, right? We don't want to go too thick. We don't want to make this line too thick and put it up here, because when you go to draw the body of the brow, you're going to be leaving so much space between the hair and the stain. So we're going to just go slightly thinner than where her last bit of hair is, like right about here. And another common mistake that artists make is that when we place these horizontal lines right in here, is that they follow it completely straight, right? We're not going to do that. We're going to actually use, I'm going to show you guys later how to place the dots and like what you're going to be doing instead. Otherwise, you're going to end up really creating a super straight brow if we follow these placements. This is just to guide you guys into how thick the brow is going to be, okay? So think of it like a leveler. This is just helping you create straight lines all the way across. And then the last line is going to be the top of where that arch is going to land. So that's a little too low because we're cutting off hair on the right brow especially. So the top of the arch, so that would be, for example, where that would land, okay? So something like that. Okay, so now we're going to connect the dots. I'm just going to kind of create these dots right in here. Sorry, they're kind of ugly because I have my stabilizing on. And then we're going to connect them all. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, when we have our string, we're not going to be following this to the exact T, but it will kind of fall there a little bit. But we're going to take our string, anchor it in the middle, and then connect. So what happens if I go too flat, right? Look how much that cuts off her brow, right? So we're going to bring that up a little bit more. I'm going to stabilize my pen just a little bit more. So first line. Too flat. Highest point, too square. Start that over again. And you might have to do this a couple times. You don't want to cut off too much of the left brow. Because she doesn't want to go too much thicker, we have to be kind of aware of that. So I would say that's good, but look at the left brow now. You see all that space, right? That's where we kind of need to continue growing, and the lamination is going to help stretch that out a little bit. And then we're going to create our tails. So we're going to start to slope that down. So I'm going to start from here, like that. It's a little bit too pointy on the arch, so we're going to curve that down a little bit more. That's too rounded. Right about there. So you can see that the shape is a little bit too rounded, right? So now we're going to flatten this out a little bit more. Too thick in the front. Too rounded. Too arched. So I'm going to tame that arch just a little bit more. It's almost there. So we're kind of just playing with that shape a little bit. See, I think what's happening is that tail is too long. Let's try that. Something along those lines. I probably would shorten this a little bit more, right? So it's a little bit flatter. The tail is a little bit outwards, a little bit more. Shorten the tail, probably thicken this up like right in here. But something along those lines so it keeps her brow lifted in this area here. And then from there, we would go in and fill this in, right? A little bit more. So that is the end of the mapping tutorial. That is what I would do if I had a client like this. I hope overall that gave you guys a little bit more insight on how to approach a client with brows like this when it comes to shaping. And please let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments below. Other than that, you guys can learn all of this in depth inside my Badass Brows online course, where I cover all of the face shapes, all of the brow shapes, each mapping point, even more so in depth with live models, with actual string, as well as follow along tutorials with dummy heads and practice exercises for you guys to be doing at home. All right, see you in the next video.